Smell the smell of grass and leather. There were days when we'd play too. We'd cross the lines when the sun would shine and make our dreams come true. I had a glove on my hand and a girl in the stands. She stole my heart like a hit and run. It seems the world was so much simpler back then. We was just out there for fun. I pray for someone to hold your hand, and baseball in the summer, someone to walk with you when this world grows cold. Baseball in the summer, baseball in the summer.
Mac Legendary Rivals Podcast, and today we're going to be talking a little bit, it's kind of like a road show. It's kind of like Chris Farley and David Spade. It's a little bit of, Abbott and Costello. It is one half of the merry duo that used to entertain us in the back of the vans on our way to all of the big U.S. games. Please welcome infielder extraordinaire and legend, I think your nickname was Van Wilder here for a little bit, Brock, baseball legend Bryan Simmons. How are you, Bryan?
Doing really well, Polecat.
Well, we typically start these little sessions with a little time machine, but why don't we start with, you sound like you're pretty busy today from our conversation before we got rocking and rolling here. So Bryan, why don't you give everyone a little bit of an update as to what you're up to, because they're probably going to be a little bit surprised.
Well, I've got myself a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old now, so some of you probably have some kids that are a bit older now, but I decided to start a little later. So I have a daughter named Adele who's 2 and a son named Jonah who's 4. And currently I'm a teacher at a private school called Hillfield Strathallan College in Hamilton. I teach phys ed to JK to grade 4. So that's where I'm at right now. And it's a busy life, not a lot of sleep and not much space to do much else other than, cars.
Yeah, I think if you were to talk to a bunch of it, like my kids are 20 and 19. So, they're closer to having kids your age than I am, that's for sure. There's no real playbook for it. So, be prepared for some sleepless nights until they're kind of in their teens, and then it turns into a different kind of stress. So welcome to the club, buddy. Do you enjoy teaching? Like this seem, I think those of you who would have spent a lot of time with you back at Brock, probably wouldn't have had school teacher in the pool there if we were guessing what you were going to do. So has this always been a thing? Were you always, really great with kids and thought of it as a potential career choice?
Well, I never really thought of teacher initially. I was more of a science GIS guy in school, but I've always enjoyed connecting with kids. Younger kids too, not necessarily the sort of high school or teens, but I do coach a bit of middle school hockey as well. So I enjoy coaching hockey, but I've always connected well with younger kids, and I feel like there's an easiness to it that hanging out with adults doesn't necessarily have. Like it's pretty light. So and I like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't recall you and I getting into too many super deep conversations in the backs of the buses or the backs of the vans. It was more entertaining than not, for sure. Why don't we, let's start the process that we've done with everybody else. Where'd you grow up, and how did you develop a love for sports?
Well, I grew up in Burlington. I have a younger brother who the two of us sort of pushed each other, but he was a lot better than me at both baseball and hockey. So I was sort of trying to tread water and just be above him, even though I was 2 years older. And so that was always a struggle, but it pushed me to be better at both baseball and hockey, and constantly be competitive. And so, yeah, we played a lot together. It actually really helps to have siblings to play sports with, to get your reps in an enjoyable way, to get yourself, the hours you need to be pretty dexterous at either any of these kind of sports with the hand-eye, right? So, yeah, I played baseball in Burlington, and Mark Kasoyan was one of our friends from our high school as well. He played there, and I played with a couple other guys, like you mentioned earlier, Nate Kapusa. He played on my rep team, and yeah, I played a lot of hockey, baseball in the summer, hockey in the winter, and all the way up with playing some rep. I enjoyed it all through high school as well, and so I was interested in competitive baseball. I was comfortable there, and I enjoyed it. So I was looking for it when we got to Brock as well. But I didn't come to Brock as one of the recruits. I was sort of there already, and I was working on my sort of geography, my GIS, my cartography, my biology. And once I think it was you and Ted who started up tryouts in the gym for the ball team.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was definitely something I wanted to be a part of. And so I remember there was a whole whack of us in the gym starting off, and it got whittled down to a core group. But then it just didn't seem fair when all of the Ontario team guys came in, and McRae came in, and then a lot of the guys we got comfortable with, like Farmer. I remember there was a shortstop too that thought he had it made too, and yeah, there wasn't too many left of us that were from that tryout, I believe. Is that right? That there was like a handful of us that ended up making the team.
Well, it's funny where there was a lot of people that made the team was the pitching staff. So
right.
9 of the, I think 8 out of the 10 pitchers, maybe 7 of the 10 pitchers all came from the indoor workouts. So if you think about it, that would have, with the exception of Joel Garten, Steve Vautour, and who was arguably also a position player. And
he was a good shortstop too.
He was a very good shortstop.
Yeah.
And Ron. So those were the 3 that came onto the pitching staff. Everybody else had survived or been in part of the winter workouts. Position-wise,
was Ebes there? Was Chris Ebel? Yeah.
Chris and I talked about, what was the recollection of everyone seeing this table set up in the hall, and Colin Tyler thought we were a bunch of people playing fantasy baseball and drinking beer and watching Jays games. He thought it was like a club of, I don't know, people that play baseball board games as opposed to
baseball enthusiasts.
Yeah. So, but I think we talked to most people that came, and kind of made it clear that it was going to be a team that was competing against other universities and colleges at the time. Were you always an infielder, Brian? How did you come to, the positions that you played, and did you have any coaches in Burlington that were particularly influential?
Well, on my way up, I was actually a little bit undersized, so I didn't grow until grade 12. So I was sort of 98 pounds in grade 9. And when everyone else shot up, I was still small. So I wasn't necessarily much of a power hitter. I was more of a contact hitter. But I had to sort of scrape to get my playing time. So I would sort of do whatever it took to be a player that would get any time. So I would be a middle infielder. I would be an outfielder. I played some third base, and I caught too. So I pretty much played everything until I found a hole I could find a home in to get a regular at bat, right? So, but I kind of enjoy that too, because it keeps you kind of working on different skills. Like third base is vastly different from turning double plays in the middle.
For sure. Did you have, Did you also play high school baseball? Because high school baseball is pretty big in Burlington, and
Yeah.
you guys had some pretty good rep teams for sure. So,
Yeah, our Burlington rep team was really good, and Nate was on mine. Mark Kasoyan was on the year younger than me. Same with Joel Garton. And so, yeah, we always had really good teams. Our Burlington's big enough to support pretty decent tryout draw from enough of an area. So we went to the Sarnia Gold Bat too. Like we went in some bigger tournaments. So like highlights would be playing Puerto Rico and hitting against those guys. And those are the kind of memories I had. But yeah, I really enjoyed playing sort of competitively with that team, and I was always kind of just like scrapping for playing time and doing what it took to stay in the infield or be a second, fifth, seventh outfielder or a third baseman or a catcher.
Yeah, that's good. Well, listen, and so you're taking geography. How did geography and Brock University come into the mix here? You're progressing through high school, you're playing in rep ball, and you've got to make a choice on a university. Do you remember what universities you picked, and was it the campus tour that did it for you, or the program, or I think we've had some guys say they really loved that Brock was just far enough that their parents couldn't come visit them all the time, but do you remember what was the clincher for Brock and why you chose to go there?
Well, I remember that I sort of tried to get into some universities and I sold myself short as far as what I thought I could get into. And so I got into them all, and I didn't really want to go to Windsor or Carleton. And so I didn't apply for anything higher because I sort of got some bad advice from a counselor. And that was the moment I applied. But I'm actually like, after going, I don't want to downplay Brock because I really enjoyed it. And I actually found, compared to some of my friends' universities, I really enjoyed the fact that I could see people that I knew in the hall. And that it was a little bit more that like a larger high school where you would actually know people as opposed to being a number at Western or U of T. So I actually, one of the reasons why I chose Brock too was because it was close. So I could still connect with my brother and my friends, and be at home in Burlington. So I didn't live at home, but I, was able to shoot back and forth pretty easily. But yeah, I have fond memories of Brock for sure.
In your first year, were you in res? Do you remember, were you in residence first year? Or?
I was in the Queenston residence actually before it was taken out. And so that was actually really tough because we had to take the, I think it was like the 104 bus. We had to go to the Penn on the way, and it took a long time. And so it dissuades you from going to class very much. But I remember a lot of people dropped that were in my residence. They weren't there the next year. They sort of, started taking it easy and not going as much. But it was kind of a funny thing. I remember coming back from going to res for our, I think it was our indoor workouts, and like going to the Viper Club after or whatever. Like just it's funny to remember some of the places and strange what our life was like at the time, right?
Yeah, and I've said this, to everybody that was there before. There was a lot of freshmen that played on the team, but there were also some people who had already been at university for 2 or 3 years. So we always had this social calendar, as I like to call it. It was Front 54 and Isaacs and Smart Alex and Gourds and Shooters and the Viper Club, and eventually a Big Bucks came into the mix. And
yeah,
Tailgate Charlie's, I found out from Peters. I'm like, I thought there was only a Tailgate Charlie's in Oshawa, but apparently there's one in St. Catharines too.
Yeah, I think there was a Tailgates. Yeah.
Yeah. And so everyone kind of had a bit of that going on, and you kind of balanced your schedule a certain way so you didn't have so many morning classes. So all of us would take a night class or two, and and then all of a sudden baseball's on us and it changes everything. But we'll get into that in a minute. So you're at the Queenston residence, which you have to describe this for people, because I don't believe that any other university has had a residence quite as atrocious as the Queenston residence. I thought it was like a big, it was basic old nursing quarters, right? Adjacent to the hospital.
Yeah,
that
it's just a
they
big rectangle. There's like, not that I need architecture to be happy, but it was, there was just some stairwells and some floors, right? And
yeah, it was like cinder block. Like everything was a cinder block, right?
yeah. So yeah, it was kind of rough, and the roughest part of it was probably like just the hospital food was our lunch. That was our entire meal plan was hospital food. So you go over and there's like, I don't really want the beefaroni or the jello, and there's like an egg sandwich I can get.
Oh
Yeah.
God.
And so people were stacking their own fridges with like if they saw a chicken salad sandwich pop up.
Oh, man.
That's how it would sort of go. But you know, like beggars can't be choosers when you have like meals that are made for you ready as well. But at the same time, it wasn't ideal. I wouldn't say. Like I remember seeing, you know, some of the other residences and being just like absolutely disgusted with what we had to deal with. Right.
I think everyone who saw the Village at that point, I remember the Village was relatively new compared to everything else.
Yeah.
Especially if you were stuck at the Queenston residence, you know, was like super pissed off. But
Even
I do
the queue
remember,
in there. Yeah.
yeah,
The
the
queue
queue
was
was
fine.
right on campus, so you could just roll out of your bed and
Yeah.
you know go to class.
Yeah, but the
which was
village was next level. It was way better for sure.
yeah, I know
Yeah.
there was kind of a pecking order when it came to the res. Um, I do know one thing that was an absolute rite of passage at the Queenston residence. So I'm going to ask you whether you indulged in this particular thing. But everybody there would go on a late night run, usually fueled by some form of libation, and would steal milk crates so they could pop their bed up and store stuff under it. Did you partake in the milk crate theft that was a plague of St. Catharines?
Yeah, that my bed was propped. I had a high bed. Yeah. Yeah, it was just a weird thing. It was like, what games do we got? We got milk crates propping our beds, and well, if we're at the Queenston residence too, we got hospital pants, right?
Yeah.
So there you go. So like we had a line to some hospital pants as well. So
You know, it's funny. It is one thing I remember about you is you rocking the hospital pants in the hallways of Brock. So, you know, clearly you were in for a penny, in for a pound at the Queenston residence, Bryan Simmons.
yeah, I had a good university time. like we were talking about earlier, like it took a little bit for me to mature potentially, right? And so I was having some fun while I was there, and that's, you know, it had to do with milk crates and hospital pants, right?
I think having, you know, I think that is one of the things that really separates Brock is, you know, I've had some experiences with other campuses, and obviously I have a couple daughters that one's at Laurier, the other one's on soccer scholarship up at Nipissing. And, you know, you need a well-rounded university experience because you grow up on many levels. One of them is socially you grow up. It's different than hanging in high school where you've got a small group of friends. And, you know, that is one thing that Brock is really good at is helping kids and people break out of their shell a little bit, because I found it to be absolutely liberating at Brock. I loved it from that perspective. So, you know, super great.
Yeah.
Do you remember, you know, what did you think of your classes, you know, first year? You're obviously doing classes without there being baseball. Did you find the courses, you know, odd or strange in any way? Because we've had the phys ed people talk all about the, you know, odd curriculum that they had at Brock involving movement, and how some of them quickly transferred over to sports management as soon as they could. But how did you find the you know, the courses you were taking?
Well, the courses I was taking was like, the style is different when you're in like a 300-person lecture hall as opposed to, you know, your classroom from high school. But I actually felt like I thrived. I felt like I was actually in a pretty tough high school, but didn't know it. So that's why I sold myself a little short. But when I got there, I found myself out competing people who seemed to have better marks than me coming in, but didn't have the work ethic. And so I actually really enjoyed it. And I kind of liked the fact that nobody was on you, but I kind of had my own discipline where if it wasn't happening for me, like I had calculus, and I started not doing so well in calculus. So but I was able to teach myself from the textbook if I put some time into it. And so I kind of like that challenge as a, you know, it was harder, for sure. but I quite liked the sort of process of becoming more independent and forcing myself to be a little bit more disciplined. And it didn't, obviously university doesn't work for everybody in that way, but I think those that, you know, sort of found themselves succeeding or figured out how to get it done probably, you know, enjoyed the process afterwards, because it made them, you know, able to manage challenges on their own as opposed to with their parents and being overseen at home.
Yeah, it certainly is a totally different mindset, and if you embrace challenge, you know, I think it's a great one. So I would say about halfway through your first year, you're gonna. I think it was coming out of the January break. You know, and I think Ted and I, for our break, we ended up painting some banners that go up, and there's some. At that time, the Brock Press was their form of media. Now they have Brock TV, which is probably a little more modern than the Inkstein wretches that were doing the newspaper at the time. But we ran some ads, and we had a table for a baseball club because we weren't allowed to refer to it as a team. And you know, do you remember what prompted your decision to come in and fill out one of those great player applications and be part of the 165 people that were going to try out for the team?
Well, I've felt like I wished we had a baseball team. Like if something played to my strengths like that, and I really enjoyed playing ball. So when I figured out you guys were trying to start up a team, I was all in right away.
Yeah, it was, and there was lots of Burlington. You know, like if I look back at it, you and Nathan Kapusa were, you know, people that came out of that initial sign up on campus. So was Rob Green. So we had 3 Burlington guys already.
I forgot about Rob Green. I remember playing ball with him in Burlington. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, look I'm sure Rob's not going to take it personally. You know, at this point, you know, he's a wonderful guy. So you guys can kiss and make up when you see each other. So we have that, and then, you know, do you recall your first impressions of those indoor workouts where there were so many people? And at first, I think the only coach that was there was Wayne Briggs Jude, so there was no McRae at first, and it was just a lot of people, and Mark LePage and Wayne Briggs Jude kind of overseeing this. It was organized, but it was just tons of people in the gym.
Yeah. And gym workouts are funny because like balls bounce funny in the gym compared to, you know, I just remember just from my own workouts with my rep team that when guys are throwing hard and they, you know, break the cement on the wall kind of thing, or, you know, when they miss, or like if they're a hard throwing pitcher. But yeah, I just remember there being a mass of players and just being a little bit overwhelmed, being like, this might be tight to make it, even though you might not be worried about the guy next to you if you're like, you know, judging the competition, but at the same time, the just sheer numbers were a bit overwhelming. So it was kind of awesome in that respect that there was, you know, that many people interested, right?
Yeah, it was a lot, and then you have to quickly make assessments so you can cut down to a minute, because you can't run. We had to break it into 4 sessions at first because we just couldn't handle that number of people in the gym at once. And I think things quickly started to separate. Like we didn't have a ton of middle infielder types at that time, and not a lot of third basemen either. But we had a ton of first basemen for some reason, and like 50 catchers, and very few pitchers too. Like it was a small number of pitchers. So
yeah, I remember Farmer though. I remember Farmer from the gym. He was great. Yeah, he was a nice guy.
Well, you know, I think there were some attitudes that really stuck out, and I've seen them in the podcast, right? Like Todd Nye was just a guy that everybody loved. And,
yeah, he was a sweetheart.
You know, and Matt King, the catcher, another guy, that older guy, worked security at Isaac, so it was always good to be able to bypass the line. But Matt was also a really good guy that helped out, just had bright attitudes from that perspective. So, but Coach McRae kind of comes in about halfway through those those workouts. Do you remember what your first conversation was with a coach? Was it with maybe Mark LePage, or did you talk to Mike first? I don't recall whether he talked to many players at those winter workouts.
I didn't talk to Mike very much. I think he talked like just briefly to everybody, like, or potentially, I don't even know if he talked to everybody, but people that, you know, he might have been interested in, I don't know, to make the team. But I remember LePage was always like really personable, and he was a really fun guy. I really enjoyed connecting with Mark, definitely through the whole process. He was fantastic. He was such a fan of the game. So like he was great. I love LePage.
Yeah, I don't think people know this, but he had a license plate that said play ball. So I think that always makes me laugh when I think of Mark and, you know, that kind of scenario. And he was just very helpful when we were setting up the tables and having to hang the banners and, you know, all that stuff, which was hard to do. He also had to go to class and stuff. Mark really rolled up his sleeves, and he had this friend of his, Larry Colangelo. I remember Larry too. These are guys that were going to be in a battle if they were going to try out as players, for sure. But they really helped out because they just really wanted to see a team on campus. So it was really shout out to Larry Colangelo, who I haven't mentioned on a podcast yet. But Bryan, do you remember how you prepare? You know, I think the one thing that was clear is Coach McRae did ask all of us to prepare for the next year by playing summer ball. Were you still playing in Burlington in the summers, and how did you prepare for the first year?
So I was playing in Burlington, but I remember him being not satisfied, and he wanted me to play for the Redbirds.
Okay.
So he went and he talked to the general manager of the Hamilton Redbirds, and so I went for a tryout, and I went and started playing there. But unfortunately, I was playing behind this set of twins who was scouted the Ridley brothers. And so I was going to play, but sit. And so it was kind of frustrating. It was kind of fun to play with wooden bats because their inter-county league was a wooden bat league. But I actually got some action too with the senior team who was the light on players.
Okay.
And so it was really funny that summer. I was playing Redbirds and senior. Right. So I was getting some at bats there because they didn't have bodies. So it was kind of an odd year playing, not with my buddies at all. Going to Hamilton, like I had a buddy named Steve Austin, and he was from Burlington, and he went with me. He joined the Redbirds too. And it was really odd summer because I was so used to playing rep in Burlington with all my buddies. And so, yeah.
It would kind of be difficult to go there to sit, even though the competition may have been, you know, I mean, playing wood bat is always interesting and kind of helps with your swing fundamentals and that kind of stuff. But
it was sort of like the Houstons. There was these twins who were middle infielders that were scouted, and their dad was also a scout. So I remember he was scouting my younger brother when my younger brother was coming up. So the Ridley twins were smooth and they were slick, but they took up all my middle infield time. So I still got some at bats, and obviously like they threw me in at third base, and they got me in there. I think I actually played against Gypsy when I was playing in that league, and his slider was pretty devastating. That was when I got a first look at his slider.
Yeah, it's funny when we have people who played against each other, right? Like that's I don't think most of us got to do that because we had such factions on the team, right? We had people from the west side of the GTA who all played IBL, and then we had people from the GTA and East who all played in the Metro League. And it's, you know, it's funny when I think of those people. I think of Colin Tyler, you know, and I think of Chris Grucci, and I think of the Oshawa guys. And I never, at least I don't remember it. Maybe I did, but I don't remember pitching against those guys, and certainly didn't do what I usually do, which would have been to hit them at some point. So, you know, did you also work in the summer? Like, were you balancing a job on top of all that craziness? Like, cause that's a lot of time. And Chris Ebel was working 2 jobs, playing ball, and he said that sleep was optional that summer.
Yeah, all my university summers were really tough. I actually one summer I worked for a pool company, and sometimes the less they pay, the more they expect out of you, and the more sort of abusive the construction sort of job is. And so that was really rough. I had one summer with Oasis Pools, which was no fun, which was like ridiculous hard work, and carrying cement and in wheelbarrows on like 8 feet up on pretty thin planks. You know what I mean? And then I worked at a tractor trailer door factory as well, and at a plastics factory. And so, yeah, I was putting in some hours, and in order to like hang out with your friends in the summer and play, inter-county, which was far away, it was tough for sure to try and, because you're needing your job to be able to pay some of your tuition and your cost of living, right?
Yeah, it's something that we had to really make our summers count from that perspective, because it was just so much. And at that point, they had started phasing out OSAP, and it was all student loan at that point too. So, Bryan, do you remember what went into the decision to get the house, your place in Thorold there? Because that's a big part of a lot of stories related to training camp, because people would kind of use it as a flop house in between sessions when we were doing two-a-days.
We didn't have a house in Thorold. We had it in sort of St. Catharines near the downtown. Okay. It was 66 Albert Street was where it was. And so me and Kasoyan lived with me, and four other buddies of mine from my first year residence. And so it was a fun house. You know how large houses of boys can be, second, third year university. But so it was a place to go for people who didn't have their own space, or some of the guys that were in res, would go to res still, or they would, come hang out with us. And it was a good place to go in between.
Yeah, I'm trying to. It's obvious. I knew that the Houstons and Chris Peters had a place in Thorold, so yeah. It's. I just remember having to drive there, so it makes sense that it was in St. Catharines. But do you remember? So now we're into training camp comes, and we have to come to school early, and it's hotter than hell in Thorold there. And now all of a sudden we've got a full coaching staff. So Daryl Kemp is there, which nobody had met. I had, but Daryl Kemp is there. Jeff Lounsbury is there. We have Coach McRae now really putting his stamp on things. Do you remember what you were feeling the first day of camp, where all of a sudden we swelled back up to about 50 people and are at this park in Thorold, and it's now game on right away?
I remember it being competitive, and I remember realizing fairly quick that I wasn't starting at second base anymore. Larry was going to be there, right? He was pretty smooth, but they were pretty great guys too. Larry and Daryl. Daryl actually lived with me the next year in a house. We had a competitive team, and I remember also like McRae would tighten it up a little bit. He'd give it to you if you weren't running fast enough on your single, right?
Oh yeah,
yeah. If you don't round first hard, you're done. You're sitting now. Like you did, that wasn't a hard rounding of first, so you're done.
Yeah, it's a big adjustment, right? Because we were all used to playing in rep programs, and some of us with, like even Team Ontario or like a NeoBA team. The coaches were not on you about how you rounded bags. They weren't on you about how fast you ran on and off the field. I remember the biggest adjustment for me was as a starting pitcher, I would always let the players run out to their position, and I'd walk out of that dugout and take that mound slowly, because you're killing time until the catcher puts their gear on. And the first time I did that at camp, Mike nearly killed me. He was like, you run out to your position like everybody else does. And, that was a wake-up call right away, because I was just so used to being that I liked intimidating the other team. So I would take my time and kind of stare them down and wait for the catch. It was mostly to make sure the catcher got their gear on. But yeah, we all had those kind of wake up moments, eh? Where we're like, okay,
Yeah.
this is different.
I don't think it was me, but somebody got sat for not rounding first. He was setting an example, right? And somebody also got taken out of our inter squad because they walked to first a little before they ran, right? On when they took 4 balls. And so there was also, he was trying to institute a little bit of strike him out, throw him out. And so like you were always being tested by Fletcher or somebody, back at first, right?
Yeah.
He was trying to institute a little paranoia on the base path. But yeah, no, it was like the sort of next level paranoid, get it together, tighten it up, kind of, look like a pro team here.
Absolutely. So what were your, every hitter is going to have this. What do you recall of your interactions with Coach Kemp?
Coach Kemp was really aloof and had a funny attitude. I really liked, I like, there was an aspect I really loved of his Cadillac with spitters in the back. You know what I mean? Like he really had a vibe about him.
Yeah.
And he had been sort of more of a pro coach, right? He's had some experience in his life. So it was sort of like the kind of can't wait to see what this clown unlocks. But it turns out he's spitting on your shoe in the dugout. Like he was next level. So you got to watch yourself for him.
Now, I don't recall, were you part of the group that liked to do, did a spitter or two with him? Or
yeah,
you?
I used to dip. I used to dip, and if you're not starting to, you got to entertain yourself somehow, right? And so,
yeah, for sure. It's so we progressed through the camp, and I do recall that day that I thought it was the first day of camp. It may have been the second day of camp where I felt it was important for the Oshawa group to build some bridges with the Burlington group, because you guys were, not only did you have Rob, yourself, Nate, Brad Tupper, that were all Burlington guys, but
Tupper, yeah.
So now we have, on top of that, Joel Garton, Mark Kasoyan, and Ryan Thompson. So there's really 7 or 8, if you think about it, but roster 25. We had 5 Oshawa guys and 7 Burlington guys. That's half the roster is between those two organizations. And so I remember coming to visit you guys, and I think first impressions make every impression in the world, right? I was obviously familiar with you and Robbie and Nate from indoor tryouts, but it's really at that point I first get the dynamic of you and Mark Kasoyan and how you guys were friends and had this crazy relationship where you guys were rapping on each other all the time. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with Mark, because I think everyone kind of lumps you two together and makes it look like a Lethal Weapon where you're, Riggs and Murtaugh kind of thing. Did you guys always have that kind of get on each other kind of way about you, or is that just you developed over time?
But we played a lot of stickball together too, and Burby and stuff like that. So we just had so much history together that we didn't have any inhibitions around each other. We knew who each other was, and we joked with each. It's sort of like when you watch Family, and they can be a little bit cutting to each other, right?
Yeah.
When we've had so much experience together growing up through just going to school together and everything like that too, and my brother having him around all the time too, and so we just have a lot of history.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty cool, and I think you guys really were two that really branched out and developed other relationships on the team. We've mentioned Larry and Daryl, but there's other people obviously that you guys start spending some time with, and Chris Peters is another one where I think that's, that's kind of where that bridge was built a little bit.
Right.
Did you feel at any time that, it was going to be cats or dogs to make the team? Like, did you feel that intense competition there, or were you pretty secure that you were going to make the team at a certain point? Because
Well,
you're a very
I thought I was
fundamental
secure
player.
in the gym. I did not think I was secure at
Okay.
the camp. Once I saw the competition at the camp, like there's good players that came in, like lots of good players that came in. So it wasn't unfamiliar territory. Like just on my rep teams, there's lots of good players, and you got to fight for playing time. And you're going to be the bottom guy if you don't do something. And so, yeah, I was sort of used to it. It was a bit of a paranoid environment for sure. If you're feeling less than, or you're seeing certain people, like you watch, like maybe Jess Dixon gets a hit, and I'm like, I'm in this group of guys that I got to show them that I can hit here, because like there's a lot of us infielders that they could use or could take, and unless you show you can hit, you might not be on the top group.
Well, the hitting wasn't, I mean, I don't. The hitting wasn't going to be easy because we also were, we ended up being pretty, deep on the top end of our pitching staff. So, it was. The guys who could throw, they could really throw. And, I've been on maybe a couple pitching staffs later in my career that were deeper, but the top end of it was tough. You had Joel Garton, who had a killer curveball and a pretty good heater, and you had Ebel with his variety of stuff, and Batur with that slider of his, and he didn't come till a little bit later, but Rob Green was experienced. So it wasn't easy to hit in camp because you were facing our pitching. It wasn't like you're facing a pitching machine or George Brown out there. So I could see how the competition would have been tough. And so in the infield, you also had to deal a lot with Jeff Lounsbury. Tell me a little bit about what your initial thoughts were of Jeff.
I got on well with Jeff. I thought he was he was fair, but he was sort of like, he would rip on guys a little bit, but that's a good relationship to have. Like, it keeps it light, right? It's not just business. So I actually quite liked Lounsbury. He would sort of speak freely and have good relationships with the players as well. And so much like LePage, like good relationship with him too. I quite enjoyed Lounsbury.
Yeah, I think, in being a pitcher, I didn't have a lot of exposure to their coaching from that perspective. I had a different role as my role within the team. I would get a little more insight into it. But when I was at the Diamond, I was just always with Coach Topping, and we're in our own little world there for a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you remember what it was like the day you found out you made the team and we got our jerseys and that kind of thing? Do you remember feeling a sense of relief, or was it, it was great? People have different points of view on that day when they went and looked at that list that got posted on the back of the wall of the Park and Thorold there.
I don't really remember too much about it, but just being really happy, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure it was definitely a sense of relief, because I did feel like I was, because I wasn't starting, right? So I did feel like I was on the bottom, and so I had to try and be one of those people that was going to be useful for the team. And so I was happy. There was relief, I'm sure.
I remember Coach McRae saying to me, "You look tired," because I was tired. I said to him, "I am tired. I've been running all camp because for whatever reason, I kept being on the losing teams of the inter-squad games, so I had to do the duck walk, and then the next time I had to do the suicide sprints, and then he did that thing where, I don't know whether you remember that torturous drill he did where he lined us all up on the baseline and he had the whistle, and you had to catch the guy in front of you, and if you caught him, the guy had to go do 50 push-ups, but Mike would just put him back in the line. So we were just basically sprinting for almost, it felt like an hour, and it was the closest I came to throwing up in, I think, ever, where it was just like, and so I was tired at the end of camp because I wasn't used to 2-a-days, and had a lot of other obligations outside of it. I think we were all pretty tired at the end of that camp because it was
definitely a tiring camp, especially the 2-a-days for sure.
Yeah, it was a big step up compared to
his workouts were, and his punishment workouts, sort of like a bag skate in hockey. I remember vividly running poles in front of our parents after a doubleheader.
Yeah, that was against Canisius, I think, and he was just not happy with our effort, and so we had to run. Yeah, we were out on that foul line running with parents.
We were on the foul line. It wasn't poles we were running. It was like poles would be what you would run if as a punishment pregame if you didn't like what was happening. You'd have to go run poles.
Yeah, it was sprints. We had to just sprint out and run back and sprint out, and I think everyone's parents were waiting to take us out to dinner, and we came with our tongues hanging out of our mouth afterwards. So that brings us to the season, Brian. What do you got any like memories of the season, and just the change also in your life, because now all of a sudden it was super intense this season. We were on the field. I would say it was 7 days a week, because we'd practice and we would play a midweek game and we would play 4 on the weekend, usually on the Friday too. So we could play up to six to 8 games a week, and practicing all amongst that. So that's a big thing. And I remember I had to adjust my schedule because I had a night class in there and stuff that no one told me about heading into the season, and you just have to adjust really quickly. What do you remember about the season?
So I remember how many games we played against teams that weren't in our league. I remember being in those like Econoline vans or whatever they were, that were like extendo vans with like tinish in the back, and just like it was just so long we were driving, and just like I was obviously probably bit of a goof, as you can remember, because we were trying to entertain ourselves, and so it's probably a bit much, but
it was not a bit much, but we can't repeat some of it on the podcast. That part I can say, because while I would laugh my ass off, I think we better just leave that one till we're in person. Truthfully, I remember a specific story when we were headed to Cooperstown, and you and Cass were talking about or at least Cass was talking about what he would do when you would go home. And it was just, I remember crying, laughing, because you guys could get that out of me all the time. But, but do you remember like specific games or like at bats or moments where you got to get into the game and that kind of stuff?
A couple games do stand out. And obviously, like you touched on I think where we were at Canisius, or were we at where McRae got tossed?
Oh, that was definitely at St. Bonaventure.
Oh, sorry, that was St. Bonaventure, not Canisius. I remember Canisius came to us too.
Yeah.
But that was a vivid memory, just because it was pretty supercharged. The energy was high because he got tossed, but that ump wasn't giving us anything low from Ebes. And I remember I yelled, "Give your head a shake, Blue," and McRae made me do 50 in the dugout. And I remember didn't their guy take out Fletcher as well at the plate?
He slid through, I think, second base, and maybe he took out Larry Houston. Yeah.
So it got physical and it got a little bit rowdy, but it was like a little bit frustrating that Ebes was throwing seeds and their guy was throwing same pitch. He's getting called strikes, so it was really frustrating in that regard. It was a real sort of seemingly a homer ump.
Yeah.
And so I think all of us remember that game pretty heavily. But I remember, I being the peg that was sticking out with you're not allowed to yell at the ump. McRae wanted us to be tight and respectful, and like if somebody's going to yell at the ump, it's going to be him. You know what I mean? He's going to take that. So I remember that, but like a lot of obviously I told you about the poles we were running after our doubleheaders that McRae didn't really like. Couple times hitting when you get great, you actually get that at bat and you make the best of it. So you get on base, you get a hit. Yeah, that felt good. But cold days coming in cold off the bench on super cold days, like if Gypsy would go in, they would move over. I think they moved Hoover over to short, and I'd go into third sometimes. And just a super cold hand playing, like you're coming in cold playing a ball, somebody tries to bunt on you and you're trying to barehand it, like making a tough play when you're cold, right? On a cold day. It was tough.
Yeah. Yeah, that is tough. And you know, and also I think there was generally a underestimation of how good the Canadian teams were until we really got a chance to see U of T and McMaster and
playing at Christie Pitts. I recall U of T looking real slick. They had some great players as well, so I really enjoyed that. But just like, being a part of the team and having your day to day and just the camaraderie with the guys. Like, I was tighter with Chris Ebel and Dan Pino and me and Cass were friends too. And we met Juice coming in, and there's some good guys that were friends on the team. So like it was a good club. It was fun just being a part of the group.
Yeah, I do have a specific memory of you and I, because I wasn't very talkative when I was pitching, so no one really talked to me because they knew better. But when I wasn't pitching, it was pretty easy going. But I remember us having a little bit of fun, poking fun at poor George Brown, because I think you and I started nicknaming them, because the first baseman was a professor named Bill Albuquerque, and was an old guy with a big beard and his kids in the stands. And, but the second baseman had a volleyball knee pad on the outside of his baseball pants. And I remember you and I killing ourselves laughing over knee pad. And it would just be like, look, knee pad is going to, slide on his knee there. And, George Brown I feel bad for them. And truthfully, one of the best players in Canada, a pitcher named Dave Hatch, who I played with in Oshawa, he ended up going to George Brown and playing on the baseball team. He pitched for them, and he played center field. He would have been the best player in George Brown's history by a country mile. So I'm glad Hatchie was not. He was playing at Canisius the year that we were, barnstorming through with this first ever team. I'm glad that we didn't have to face him. Actually, that would have been kind of hilarious in a kind of a fun way. What do you remember about nationals, Brian? And do you remember the trip down and the crazy environment of referendum weekend and all of that kind of rigmarole?
Well, there's one thing that stands out about playing Laval. And you remember that stud pitcher they had who played AAA?
Bertrand Chabot. Certainly do.
He was unreal, and he shut us down. But when we were shaking hands and he was snapping his finger around your hand like that as he shook, that blew my mind. He did that. We shook hands, and he had big hands, and he would snap as he shook your hand.
Wow, I can't believe you remember that. That was
unreal. I was blown. I was blown away by him because he played so well. Right? He was such a good pitcher, but like that snap was just so like not necessarily arrogant. I've never seen it before. I was like, wow, you just did that, didn't you?
Yeah, I spent 7 years working for the French, so Quebecor, and some things that in English Canada that we would misinterpret or just not quite understand. They aren't, when everyone will say, it's a sign of arrogance or it's this or that. It's not. They just have slightly different things. Like for many, many years, Pepsi was the number one choice of the two colas in Quebec. It was one of only two places in the world. The other place I think was Finland or Sweden or one of these Slavic countries where Pepsi was preferred to Coke. And, there are nuances to French Canadian culture and life that are different. And it's easy to misinterpret unless you understand. So
I certainly didn't necessarily take it as arrogance. No. I didn't know how to take it. Right.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And you also have to have a really big hand to be able to even do it. So I didn't really know there was a possibility. Right.
And you probably have not seen it since, right?
No. Nobody's ever done that to me since.
Yeah, that's great. So, Brian, we get to the end of the year. It's a very successful but very intense time for everybody. We have a few players that, had to recommit to their academics. We have other ones that got job offers. We had a few that graduated. But the coaching staff kind of puts in you got to play in the spring or else kind of thing there. Do you remember what your decision was to what were you thinking come out of the first year? Were you thinking of going back to play, or, um, what were you doing when you were clearing your head? And we knew that Mike was leaving and going to Niagara at that time. Do you remember what your head was at the end of that year?
Well, I remember enjoying myself, but at the same time, I felt like it was so all-encompassing, our team, that I was not necessarily missing out on university, but I felt like it was just too much. Like just going to the States for the weekend. Like, I mean, there's people that have, like I love baseball, but it's a pastime. It's not, I didn't see myself as somebody who was going anywhere, right? I knew I was sort of destined for men's league if I choose that. But yeah, so I was asking myself why I was doing what I was doing, and so I had a really great time. I loved the team, the camaraderie of the team, the whole thing. It was actually a really great experience. But I felt like I wanted to do school and have a social life back again, because I had a social life before and that died. That was completely snuffed out by curfews. Like my friends were having keg parties and I wasn't there at all. Yeah. And like I don't need to be having keg parties, but I need to be doing the things that me and my friends are doing at school together. And I wasn't with my actual friends at all. We were in vans, you know what I mean? We were running polls. We were doing fundraisers. And so I just decided that it was a better choice for me to just get back to university for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something I think that a lot of people can respect and understand, because I think a lot of people made those same decisions in one form or another, because it was super intense. It was a very intense period of life.
It was a huge commitment, right?
So, it was a super, yeah. And I think the other thing is it'd be one thing if you've gone through it for a year or even half a year and kind of have some sort of teaser of what that's going to be. But no one prepped us for this. It's kind of like, okay, 1, 2, 3, on comes the fire hose, right? Like you're drinking from a fire hose. So
yeah. Well, my studies were suffering a little bit too. Like the prof in one of my geography classes was making fun of me in front of the class because I was asleep. I was in the front row of the lecture, but I was asleep because we were up at 6 that morning running, with a 2-hour practice. And that was one of the ones where I remember doing sort of suicides, like running, and people were thrown up, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have your energy balance together, which kids in university don't necessarily all the time, like I fell asleep by mistake, like pretty stupid too, if you're tired, to be sitting in the front row. But you could say I had it coming to me. Yeah. But I recall things like that were sort of happening. And I also had to make sure that I wasn't going to, because fail out, the sciences have a little bit more time that you need to put into, especially biology. I remember really suffering in my botany class. I think I scored a 56 or something like that.
Yeah.
But like you just need to put in the time. And I remember it didn't jive with our team at all. And I went to my lab, and so I was half an hour late for our 2 hours before the game practice where we hit wiffle balls, right? And McCrae took me over to the side and he was like, "What are you doing? Why aren't you here? Why aren't you dressed? Why aren't you out there?" And I was like, I went to my lab. I apologize. And he's like, "You were starting. You're not now. Go run polls till the game." So that's how it went, right? Like, and so if I'm getting, punished for going to school, it's hard. I asked him about it. I was like, "Why? Like, I'm gonna have to go to class when we're not playing, right?" And he was like, "The other guys figured it out. Why didn't you?" So and I was like, a lot of them are in phys ed, right?
Yeah.
And I don't mean phys ed's less than biology. There's just more biology labs to it, like scheduled extra labs outside the lectures. And so I was a little bit frustrated. I had a little bit of angst based on those kinds of interactions with Mike as well. And whether I was even starting or not, he was probably just trying to send a message to me that he wants me to be as available as these other guys for sure. Right.
Yeah. And I think it's safe to say that the way the coaching staff was constructed, that if you're going to have frustration with someone, it's going to be with Mike, because, you know, he's the one that's directly handing out the punishment for what he would see as not being part of the team. And yet, you know, I think there maybe time and a little bit of, if we were to back the truck up and have a bit of a, you know, like the teams in subsequent years had the academic advisors at the university that would say to everybody, really, your varsity team is going to be your 5th course, so take 4 of them as opposed to 5. Right. And, you know, these kinds of things that no one prepared us for. Some of us went in with 5.5 credits in that first term because we were wanting to get ahead or fast track. So, you know, I think there's a lot of things that were the byproduct of just not enough knowledge at that point. So,
yeah. And I mean, if I had prepared myself for the year, I definitely would have thought about taking a longer university. I mean, you know, and cutting a course, but like, yeah, I was overwhelmed for sure. And you're just trying to make ends meet. If you're getting 56s, you know what I mean? It's not going to pan for you. And it's like, I knew the time was a problem.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, did you feel it affected your personal relationship with Coach McRae? Like, did you feel like you were in his sights every so once in a while?
Well, I'm familiar with the dynamic of a bit of a hardo coach. You know what I mean? Like you can get the best of your players if you sort of, there's many different ways to skin a cat, but I don't feel like he was necessarily abusive in any way. But he just likes to run a tight ship, and he sort of was wired pretty tightly. And so he was strung tight, and he was ready to throw down, you know, at you if you weren't looking like what his team wanted. He wanted his team to look like. So I understand where his line was, and that it's actually good that, you know, he shows you his boundary. He's like, you crossed it, right?
Yeah, I feel uniquely qualified to talk on this, but he was also hard on the pitchers because he was a pitcher. So from a performance standpoint, you better go out there and throw strikes or you would hear it. Yep. And you know, there were times where you know, it was tough. Like, and it wasn't necessarily, I didn't catch a lot of flack because I had a really good year, but I saw people like maybe Ron and Joel to a certain extent, you know, where they were looking for answers, and, you know, Mike was trying to help, you know, make them grow up, which is hard to do on a mound when you're facing people with aluminum bats. I will say that. Like you've got to do your growing up and your bullpen sessions away from the competitive field, in my estimation. You got to learn how to pitch there before you can bring it out to a mound, because you're going to get your brains beat in with really skilled hitters using aluminum bats. There's a lot more give with wooden ones. So, you know, you learn to be less fine in the strike zone and let your stuff do the work. But yeah, I think Mike was very definitive, and depending on who you had as a coach prior to in your rep career or your high school career, he could be a real culture shock. And I think for some of the Burlington kids who had their parents sometimes as coaches, I think this was more difficult than it was for the Oshawa guys, where we really didn't have anyone's parent as a coach. Right. We had independent coaching, which was a benefit to us, because we were already used to kind of a little bit of the hardcore core portions of it. So you make the decision to go back to being Bryan Simmons, a student. Tell me about the next year where you're living with Daryl Houston. Also made the decision to go back and be a student, and you're living with Cass. Tell me about that year a little bit, and kind of what it was like to know a guy like Daryl off the field, and now all of a sudden you're not also part of this a very immersive team culture.
Daryl was a really, really nice guy too. He was a friend of ours, and same with his brother Larry. And Daryl lived with us, and he ended up not going to school for the entire year. He ended up working at the Home Depot, and so. But I don't know if he told his parents.
Well, they're about to find out.
Yeah. But so that was always kind of a bit of a charade to try and keep that ball in the air for him and not ruin it for him. But I enjoyed living with Daryl. He was great. He was a really nice guy. The only really frustrating thing about Daryl, he always had, the game Baseball Stars for Nintendo?
Yeah.
He always had a season of Baseball Stars on, and if you use the TV to watch the TV, you would wreck his season because it would never save. So you could never use the TV, right? He's like, no, if you just wait till I finish my season, that'd be great.
Yeah, I don't want anything to do with your season. I really just want to watch,
Yeah, so TV's out until you're done your season. Okay, that's good. No. But he was a fantastic guy. So we really enjoyed living with Daryl as well.
Yeah.
It was sort of like we had some keg parties in that house, and not that I needed to it was a bit more of a university life for sure. And, I was interested in doing that at the time. Like the pendulum had swung way too far to curfews and fundraisers and going to the States in vans. Like it was a regiment. And just touching back on Mike though, like I feel like I actually thrive in that though. I thrive with somebody with like critical boundaries that they can show you. So, but that also created a lifestyle that I wasn't necessarily interested in for what reason. So my question to myself was, why are you doing this? Right.
Yeah.
And so I was enjoying it, but it was also too intense for me as far as, what I was also missing out on with my own friends that I was neglecting. I remember I came back from a weekend and they had like put a newspaper stand that they had, got one night or in my bedroom right beside my bed. And like, I was like, I don't even know what happened there. I don't know what that story is. I don't even know these guys anymore. And I'd like to, but they're fun guys, but yeah.
I can't imagine you walking into your room and there's a Toronto Star box or St. Catharines Standard box sitting there.
Yeah.
How did this happen? Like it's,
yeah. But it's sort of like, there's a lot of signs like that were just pointing me towards like, are you having fun doing what you're doing? Or are you like, so taken up that you're suffering in school? You're not hanging out with your friends. I see my brother less too, like my buddies from home, like, cause you're just like every weekend's tied up. Right.
Yeah.
And, And anyways, it was the tightness, like you were saying earlier too, like the overwhelm of of that lifestyle that, I don't mind playing it out for a little bit, but if that's going to go on for a couple of years, that's going to cut into my life a little bit.
Yeah. Did you feel you hit the reset button good? And how does this translate into your degree? And when do you wrap up your Brock University journey?
I actually feel like it was a good move academically too, because it did take some doing to get the courses that I took and get a little bit more serious about my studies. Cause like you can get a little bit, less disciplined with your nights and, your studies and getting ready for your exams and stuff like that at university. So it allowed me a little bit of freedom to still get my academics back up and my social life and enjoy it as opposed to just being in a pressure cooker. So I got my BSc in geography and GIS in the 4 years, and then I took a postgrad at Niagara College for 1 year in GIS and cartography, and that's what led me to get my job at the MTO, making the Ontario roadmap, and so I worked there for 10 years, and before I decided that the office life didn't really suit me, and I was sort of becoming a little bit depressed inside and not challenged. You know what I mean? I could sort of do my job in my sleep, and I enjoyed geography and maps, but I felt like working with kids was actually the thing. And after making the change, it was a tough road becoming a teacher and not having for a couple of years any income right. And so that was kind of tough to cash in your chips and get new cards and just be like, okay, betting on myself. Hopefully this works out. And it was a tough time to get a job as a teacher. So I was 5 years supplying before I caught on at a private school at Hillfield Strathallan College. I'm a phys ed teacher for JKs to grade 4. And I've been there for about 8 years now. And I really, really love it. Like it really suits me. And yeah, I enjoy the connection with the kids. I teach like 150 kids, and it's great. I love it. I coach hockey too. So
Yeah. And do you crack out the bag skating if the kids don't?
no, I was able to take the high school team to Europe 1 year when the coach couldn't go for his own personal reasons. So I was able to go to like with the high school team, and so that requires a little bit more toughness. But I actually coach right now a developmental group from sort of grade 3 to grade 8, where they work on skills, and we do scrimmages and stuff like that after. So I like developing players better than the but I enjoy the competitive environment too. So yeah. But I can get that from like when I coach grade 4 soccer or grade 4 track and field at the meet,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's a good question for you, just because I want to register this. What about the office environment did you find a little soul sucking? Because there's lots of people that are making these transitions after a couple of years of COVID and reassessing their careers and looking in the mirror. What did you feel was you were being deprived of?
Well, I felt like in your life for me, I required sort of meaning in my life, and up until the point where I had my MTO job, I was sort of going towards things through the process that I thought I should, right? Not that I wouldn't do university now and that wouldn't take me to where I needed to go, but just from I started sort of craving meaning a little bit more and some depth, right? It took me a little bit to mature, as you probably saw. But yeah, so I actually ended up going through some different personal life experiments at a certain point. So when I was about 27, like I gave up, the chewing tobacco, and I used to booze a lot, and that was part of my, university life too. And we got lots of silly friends. And so I actually gave up boozing when I was about 30. I started, growing a lot of food like in the backyard and experimenting with just eating healthy and instead of, what I had been doing with myself in my lifestyle. Started, practicing, trying running marathons and stuff like that. And sort of cleaned up my act. So I quit boozing for about a year and found that it was really, I didn't want to go back to booze. It totally suited me. And now as a teacher, like it totally suits me not to, have booze in my life. And some people can really, they can have it in moderation and it's not an issue for them. But I used to like having big nights, especially back in, my 20s. And it ended up being, I got my habits to the point where I wasn't necessarily enjoying one or two. And I felt like I needed a reset. And after doing the reset, it just felt better. Just doing personal experiments.
That's great.
For my headspace.
I think a lot of people.
My headspace was better. And just like, then you start craving a little bit more meaning in your life. And I was sort of challenged in my job up until the point where, I was running through the motions. And so I did enjoy making the Ontario roadmap and I was doing all the updates to it, but at the same time, I was like, there was something missing there. And I was like, I could do my job in my sleep sort of. And I was like, why am I feeling this way? Sort of, you know what I mean? And I started trying to find meaning outside of my job. And then I was like, why don't I do something that, suits me. Right.
Yeah.
And so,
I
I moved to teaching. Right.
I think self-awareness is really cool to hear because I think people still struggle for it, and they're having a hard time finding meaning. And it's really inspiring, actually, Bryan, to hear that you went through these periods of critical assessment. And it kind of leads to, I would suspect, another, tent pole in your life, which was, meeting your wife and now having kids at a relatively late age compared to some of us. Tell me about what that relationship has meant to your life.
Well, I was branching out to become a teacher. And so I started doing different things like running like a boys reading club at a school on my lunch of my job. Right. So I would sneak away from the MTO and run this boys reading club. But then I also was like sort of starting to do things that were like with working with kids teaching. And I went to this camp that was a camp for kids with cancer. and that's where I met my wife. She was a counselor there too. It was called New Heights Camp Quality, and I was sort of an intense weekend where you're a counselor for some kids, and you have discussion groups, and there's some heavy topics because a lot of the kids have cancer, and it's for brothers and sisters of kids that have cancer as well, what they're dealing with. And so I met my wife there, and I actually, at that moment, I was going to Norway for a year. I went to Norway and I taught at an international school, but so me and my wife didn't start dating till I came back from that year. But I have a pal in Norway who married a Norwegian woman, and he's got a family there. And so he'd been trying to get any reason for me to come over and have an adventure with him. And so he got me a job at his school as a teacher. And so before I even went to teachers college, I went there and worked as a teacher in his school. And we coached a Division I men's hockey team in Norway. And so we went all over Norway coaching. And so when I came back from that year, I went to teachers college and started dating Ingrid, who is now my wife and a mother of my 2 kids. And that's been a big change in my life too, because if you're someone who hasn't, who didn't have anybody like a serious relationship of, I probably wasn't dating anybody for longer than 5 months. So to get past that point with somebody was kind of an important process in my life, I would suppose, of the maturation process. And there's a lot of things that have sort of happened once I sort of grew up a little bit and stopped boozing and started being more interested in meaning and changing some things in my life. So I'm quite happy with the way things went, but it was a bit of a struggle getting a teaching job, because once we started dating and we were living together, the teaching market was really tough. And so there was no rhyme or reason to when I was going to get a job. And I was confident in myself, and I was betting on myself, and I'm confident in myself as a teacher, but it was really tough because there was a lot of time where I was going through supply and there was no movement in the board and there was no jobs available. And so that's why I got outside of the public board to somewhere where I could take a shot at them hiring me. And I'm much happier now that I'm where I am. But my relationship is definitely something that was kind of a big change in my life for sure, and has grown since I came back from Norway and built since I was about 37, 38.
So really, Norway sounds interesting. You must have some, fish out of water cultural awakening type of stories from Norway. Tell me a couple things about Norway that, you'd put up on that top 3 stories list of your adventures abroad.
Well, it's tough to consolidate a year like that, but we would when I was coaching the hockey team, my buddy Prosker, he almost made the NHL. He didn't quite make it. He had tryouts with the Coyotes and the Rangers, and just traveling around the country with our hockey team was you get to see things you would never see. Like we went into this. We went into, I think it was Ringerike, and it was all wood. It was really cold. And we were playing this team, and they're blaring the song Valerie by Steve Winwood for the warm up. And you just don't know what you're going to see or what the culture is going to be like. Right. And it was just kind of awesome. You're just in awe taking it in these strange situations. And those are moments where you're just like, how do I get to be the person who gets to do this? Right. It told me I was on the right track of doing, opening myself up to new things as opposed to staying in my cozy corner with benefits and, becoming a little bit more depressed. So even though it was tougher, like making the switch, I was fortunate to take this adventure year. And, some of the coaching moments with our hockey team and, working in the international school, I remember socially, just the difference between Norway and here, there would be we talk to each other all the time. We're so busy with our talk, and they're so quiet, and so they sort of socially keep to themselves a little bit more. Like when you leave the room, they'll say goodbye to people, and they'll just put their hand up and go hada, which means like goodbye. But they won't like interact with anybody. And I remember this one guy, Gart, came up to me, and he was like, basically, I'm gonna have a conversation with you right now. Hi, Bryan. Let's have a conversation. So like it was socially, there was this different dynamic there where they just behave differently, a little bit differently in their social patterns, in the way that they are comfortable, interacting with each other. And so, but there was another really good phrase too. It was like, talk for Morsch, I think it was called. It was thank you for the last time, which is a really nice thing to say to somebody. If like you're like calling back to the last time you hung out together. So
that's super cool.
Yeah. So there was a lot of little funny things. Like they got 45 different kinds of brown bread in the grocery store. You know what I mean? Just like odd things like that.
Did you have to eat anything that was really disgusting, and you just did it because you wanted to be part of the home team in Norway, or I think
there was brown cheese there, which was sweet, which I never really took to that much. But they had this really weird sort of Christmas experience where I played on an old boys team. I just turned 35, so I played with this group, and they had this Christmas. They all got dressed up in suits, and then they would have like 7 rounds of like fish. So like fish would keep coming, and they would drink this hard liquor called aquavit that was from there. And it was just the weirdest night too. And like at that point I didn't drink. So I was like, there was one guy who was like really mad at me because I didn't drink. And it was a very odd.
Did you eat all 7 rounds of fish though? This is the thing. Did you survive that?
It was just really, it was called lutefisk was the fish. It was a specific fish too. And no, I didn't eat that. I was a little weirded out. But
and it was like it prepared 7 different ways, or was it just they kept bringing the same thing 7 times?
I don't really even know. It looked the same to me. But,
okay. Well,
it was an odd. There was a couple of sort of odd experiences. Like
so you're not planning on going back with your family to celebrate Norwegian Christmas with the consumption of the fish? I think we can probably put that one in.
Right now, my brother's there actually coaching. My buddy has convinced my brother to go over, and he's coaching. He's driving a bus, running like an after-school club for some kids, and he's coaching like a U15 rep team there. And so he's just enjoying his year. He's having his adventure year with my pal now. So I suspect we'll be going back over to visit there when my kids are a little older. There's a connection there for sure.
I'm pretty sure you'll be comparing notes on the 7 rounds of fish there. Maybe your brother can duck out of that too, or maybe he'll take one for the team, and
maybe he'll get into it. Who knows?
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty wild, Bryan. I got to tell you. I was going to ask you, what is your relationship with your brother? Obviously, you mentioned him a few times, and I think most people know that the Brock program was started essentially as a memorial to my brother who passed away the year before we started it. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with your brother.
Well, we were sort of best friends in our life. He's probably one of my best friends, is my best friend. And up until we were about 12, it was just competitive until we dropped it. You know what I mean? And like, I think I told you about that dynamic where he was this elite player and I was this sort of regular player. But because I was 2 years older, we were even on the, in the road hockey and in the Burby and in the stick ball. Right.
Yeah.
But he definitely made me a lot better. I'm playing against, I'm trying to hit against somebody who has 7 speeds and they can hit the corners. Right. And so, yeah. He was a fantastic, sports partner. Drove me to be much better at probably all sports and hand-eye and he's coaching in Norway right now, but he used to be a handyman. He was sort of a bit of a math genius, bit of a Goodwill Hunting kind of thing that then became a handyman. So he didn't go into that. odd. He was teaching calculus in like teachers college, and then he was like, nah, blow it out. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. He actually was a great ball player, but he went to Guelph and didn't play for Guelph. I think
Well,
he saw what he saw what I was going through 2 years ahead of him,
yeah.
and he decided against it.
Yeah, I don't think the Guelph program was probably as intense, but he would have had to wear those horrific black and red uniforms. What self-respecting ball player would want to do that? That's all I got to say.
I think they didn't have the best team at the time either, but I don't think that was the issue at all. Like I feel like he was definitely he didn't want to, you know, he felt like it would be a misstep to devote his life to that if he wasn't that into it. So
yeah, and I think you know, those are, you know, it's at least his decision was well informed, right? And you know, that's the nature of participant sports or varsity sports. Like, it's, people are shocked when, you know, I read a statistic that only 6% of the people who play elite level rep sports in this country go on to play it in college or university. So, you know, it's a big misnomer to think that every rep athlete who wants their best future plotted out is going to go make a team that is, you know, has 10,000 elite students of that age with recruits. It's really hard to make a varsity team, first off.
Absolutely.
So most people are going to get cut anyway. But I think the other thing is that there would be some players who don't want to sacrifice an experience that's arguably more important for their life, right? So it's interesting to hear that you and your brother had the courage to make choices for yourselves, and not just the pursuit of a game that everyone, or sport in this case, that everyone loves, but doesn't necessarily love to the point of them wanting to take a left turn out of their life's path. So that's super cool, Bryan, and I kind of respect that. Let me ask you this. You know, 30 years have gone by. You've lived a pretty interesting life with some courageous choices in it, and could probably cook, you know, some dinner with some stuff you've grown in your backyard when we get together in about 6.5 months, 7 months. Have you stayed in touch with any of the guys, and or has life just been intense in its own way and led you on a different path? And as such, you're really looking forward to reconnecting with people you haven't seen in 30 years.
I haven't really kept in touch. I did see through some mutual friends that lived above me. I saw Andrew Tinish after the fact, not too long after the fact. It was only a few years after the fact, but I was still, you know, a little bit of a silly version of myself at the time. So he's a silly guy too. He's got a crazy sense of humor. So I remember he had a real arm too. Holy.
Yeah, he did.
But I did see Andrew afterwards. I remember, I think I saw Dan Pino too. I was friends with Dan Pino. I remember he had a crazy good move to first. He would come in sometimes for the pickoff.
Yeah.
And, but no, I didn't see too many people after the fact, except for anybody who was still from Burlington. I didn't really keep in touch after, except, you know, Daryl lived at our house at the time, but I haven't seen any of them at all. No.
So this is going to be like opening an oyster. You know, it's kind of has a pearl that you have to dig out a little bit. But I think what I've noticed, and I get the benefit of being involved with these kind of video casts where we take care of some of the conversation that we would take it a long time to go around and talk about to every single teammate we see. You know, the one thing I have noticed is after 30 years, it doesn't feel like any time's elapsed. We all might have a few more wrinkles. We might be, in my case, not sporting any more hair or put on a few pounds or any of these kinds of things, but the conversations feel like they did 30 years ago. You feel like the same people. And that's a kind of special privilege because we'll never stop being teammates. And so I think everyone's really looking forward to seeing you, Bryan, from that perspective. And hopefully, you know, given that you've made some healthy lifestyle choices, which is unusual for guys in their 50s. Hopefully you'll be able to throw across the infield, because we are going to need people who can throw across the infield without needing a cutoff man, I think. Because I think, the funny thing is...
I've had shoulder surgery too, so...
Well, that's, there's almost as many people who've had surgery on our team as have coached. So, and I feel like I'm the only one that's not coaching actively. So that'll tell you just how many. Right now, I think 19 to 20 have done some form of coaching. And that says a lot about, it was intense at the time, but I think there is sediment or resonance in our lives from just surviving the first year. You survive, you adjust, you learn about yourself. The one thing I will say about Coach McRae is he was really good at pointing out what you could be. Here's what you are if you're excellent. And, coming from a coaching culture in Canada that is designed to make you be good as opposed to be great, Mike was really different that way. I think Mike wanted us to be the best program, the best people. And he was teaching us the way that he knew how to get there, to people that didn't necessarily even know what that meant. Like I didn't know what the best version of me looked like. I was a kid. And I think you've discovered that through the process of self-discovery. But, I think that whole intense engagement with people like Mike and the team, probably like forcing yourself to look in the mirror and go, these are the choices I need to make for me to be the best version of Bryan Simmons. So I think that's super cool. Even if you had a little bit of a Van Wilder reputation, the reality is that the Bryan Simmons that's here today is a much different one than, or maybe more true to who you were as opposed to 30 years ago, right? Where you were just enjoying the ride a little bit.
Yeah. A sort of like younger version of myself that did want, part of that university life, probably. Yeah. But I would say, from the perspective of what that Brock baseball year meant to me, I don't feel like it was a bad experience in any way. Like I feel like it was a great, experience to draw back on. And I mean, Mike set the bar, right? Like, so it's important to have people that set a bar in a space that, shows you where the line is, shows you where the bar is. Because like, if you've been playing on teams where people haven't been giving you some cutting feedback, you're going to stay where you are, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think, if you look at your own life, if you wouldn't have had that fire shoot up inside you, you'd still be working at the MTO. And I think you can read directly into the choices you've made, into that ability to be self-aware, to go, I'm not happy doing this. This isn't what I want to be doing. This isn't me. And you've done that several times in your life. So I think that's a really important lesson for, not only are the players that were part of this, but, there will be some younger generations of Badgers and Marauders that'll see these things. And they got to understand that, at a certain point, you got to make choices in your life based around your happiness, not just, what seems right to other people. Make choices that are happy for yourself and that positively impact others, and you'll be amazed how life works out for you.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy about making the choices that I made and but also living that experience that we had together in Brock baseball. So I have no regrets about it whatsoever.
Well, it's amazing, Bryan. Well, listen, you've got to get some sleep, because you got a couple of youngsters that I'm looking forward to seeing, because those days are long past my rearview mirror. And, having 20 and 19-year-olds, I can give you a little playbook when they get to be teenagers, because that'll be fun. I'll be making fun of you from my rocking chair in Florida beside Peter's.
It's a different game, teenagers. Yeah.
It definitely is. So, Bryan, we've covered a lot tonight. I think, it's been a remarkable journey for you, and one of great self-discovery and kind of some adventures overseas and stuff. But we have not touched on a classic Simmons story where you are playing cat and mouse with Coach McRae. So why don't you let us in on this one? Because I think everyone's going to just probably bust a gut laughing because it just sounds so typical. So set the stage for us.
So we were at tailgates doing a fundraiser, right? I believe we were there for the early portion of the night, and we generally had, I think it was a 10 o'clock curfew sleep-wise. And so when everyone was leaving around 9:30 or, to get home, me and Ebes and Gypsy went to, I think it was Oliver's Twist. It wasn't Smart Alex anymore, same bar, but different name. And we went to Oliver's Twist, and we went there. And then we sort of got in there, got some drinks, and that was where all our pals were. And it was a big night that we were missing. And we saw across the room, we saw McRae was there. He was looking for, I guess he heard like some rumblings that people were thinking of going somewhere. And so me and Gypsy and Ebes were under this table, and there was people at the table, and we were underneath this like table, and we were watching McRae walk the entire bar, and it was a packed bar, and there's like music and dance floor going. Anyways, he was like pretty incensed, and he was like walking like an angry dad up and down the bar. Then he left. Then we kept going, and the next day we played, and so we were at the game, 2 hours before, like he likes, and we were at our stretching circle, and he called us in one by one to go talk to him, and so one by one, Ebes goes in, I go in, Gypsy goes in, and he's like, "Where were you last night?" I was like, "It's in my bed." And he's like, "Okay, you weren't out at the bar?" And I was like, "Nope." And he kept doing things that brought us away from the group to make it look like he was getting information. And I don't think he ever had anything on us, but it was definitely a moment that was really supercharged and pretty fun from the perspective of looking back on now. It was pretty paranoid at the time, but yeah. Anyways, I think we got away with that one. I think he knew we were there and just didn't catch us, and he knew that. And
was he trying to break you guys?
Yeah, he was trying to make us like one of us slip up and let us know the heat was on, right? And so I remember him calling us in twice each from the stretching circle and from playing catch.
Oh God, no! That is
separately, like not together, right?
That makes it even worse. When you guys got back to the stretching circle, were you able to? Was he watching you guys to make sure that you didn't talk amongst yourselves?
Yeah, we were pros. We didn't talk to each other.
You just gave each other hand signals or pass notes or something. It's like, don't break.
Yeah, no, we didn't talk to each other until later about it, like just to see how it all went. But like we knew it would be incriminating if we went and talked to each other.
Yeah. So out of the three of you, yourself, Gypsy, and Ebel, which one do you think would have broken under the pressure?
Well, I know me, and I know I won't. But those two are pretty tough cats. I don't feel like either of them would have broke.
Yeah, I feel like Steve is really quiet, so he could clam up pretty good. And Ebel's kind of got that swagger where he'd be like, "Nah, I was home. I was home."
Yeah.
And yeah, I could see you lasting out, whatever he would have brought out next, which may have been, knowing Mike, he may have put hot pokers under your toenails or something, because to call you in twice, that's pretty hardcore. He must have really wanted to bust you guys for going there.
Yeah, I think he knew we were there because he probably heard we were, right? Like, and he just didn't get eyes on us, right? So
it wouldn't have been us that ratted you out. There's no way.
No, it was probably somebody that overheard us talking to somebody about plans, right?
Yeah, that's classic.
But yeah. Anyways, that's the one that comes to mind that. I get a kick out of whenever I think of Brock baseball. That was sort of a fun one.
Well, I think if I see you and Gypsy and Ebel getting together and 7 months' time, I'll know that there's a plot afoot for you guys to go to some bar after we're done the movie night, or, you know, in preparation for our doubleheader the next day. Or we're not playing a doubleheader, we're playing only one. And I've scheduled it for like 11 o'clock so that we don't have to get up too early. But yeah, it's funny when you bring up stuff like that, or the, you know, those 6 o'clock running sessions, which were horrific. You know, I think there was a little bit of, we're not going to let Mike break us. He'll bring out the best in us, but he's not breaking my spirit. And there's no way. And
channels your inner warrior for sure.
Yeah, and I for one am smiling from ear to ear, because I love hearing that someone actually broke curfew. That's great. Thank you so much, Bryan Simmons. Okay. That is a great way to cap this off. I think we did a little what's called a false finish there, where like the movie's over, but we came back and brought one more story into the mix. So have a great night, and we will see you soon, sir.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
The smell